Jarrett Stephens was just 17 years old when he was asked to speak at a Fellowship of Christian Athletes event. It was then and there that he felt called to the ministry, even though at the time, Jarrett was holding on to a secret.
Jarrett Stephens is the teaching pastor at Prestonwood Baptist Church, one of the largest and fastest growing megachurches in North America. While it looks like the pinnacle of success today, Jarrett had to overcome insurmountable odds. He was sexually abused by his coach for 4 years, beginning when he was 8 years old. Through the dark times, Jarrett learned that God was with him. In his book, The Mountains Are Calling, Jarrett shares how God used his brokenness to help others and how he can do the same for you.
Jarrett Stephens is here with us now, and we welcome him to our show. Jarrett, it's great to meet you, and I have to tell you the title, The Mountains Are Calling, really spoke to me because I love mountains, and I know your book is more than just about mountains, but first of all, let's get into the secret that you were keeping for a decade. What was it, and how did it start?
Well, thanks so much for having me. And I write about this in chapter 3 of the book on Elijah and Mount Carmel. And the secret that I was carrying around was I was sexually abused by a coach from the ages of 8 to 12. And never told a soul, just for all the reasons that you hear and would imagine, the shame of it, not knowing if people would believe me, what would happen then. And so carried that with me till my freshman year of college, and I was serving at my church, at my home church, and the Lord just really began to deal with me on this, saying, man, we've got to get what is dark in your life into light if you ever want healing, if you ever want to move on. And so that's when I began dealing with it and the process of coming forward and speaking about it.
Wow, you were so young, 8 to 12 years old. Did you ever consider, well, you did consider telling your dad, but you didn't. Why not?
Well, I was scared. One, I always said to myself this, if it happened to somebody else and they came forward, I would come and affirm it, and that way we could lock and throw away the key, so to speak. But that person never came forward, and so again, in 19, I was driving into work one day, and I can remember seeing that coach that had been my coach all those years, driving in a car. He had 2 kids in his car. I knew what was going on. So then I thought, okay, Lord, it's time. I've got to say something. And so that started the whole process.
Yeah, and how did you speak up? I mean, what happened?
Well, we're all grateful for people in our life that we can trust, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to a person that I trusted, so I went to my student pastor at the church, and I said, listen, I'm going to tell you something that I've never told anybody. And it came with a lot of prayer, obviously. I was scared to death. And so I came to him and told him, and he did something that was really wise. He said, Jarrett, you're 19 years old. You don't have to tell a soul. He said, but what I'm going to encourage you to do is tell your parents. And I told the Lord in prayer, I said, if I come forward and share this secret, it's bigger than me. I'm just going to do what the next person asked me to do. And so that's really what happened. I told my student pastor, he said, I think you should tell your parents. I told my parents, which obviously broke their heart. That was a tough day, very freeing day for me because I'd gotten this secret out. But then from there, told the authorities because that's what my parents told me. And it just started a journey for us of getting it out in the open. And
did this person pay for their crime, so to speak?
He did. It was a big thing. I grew up in a small town in Louisiana, a relatively small town, and so this coach had been involved in the sports leagues for a number of years. So you can imagine the number of kids that he had coached. And when I was staying over at his house or his lake house, that's where the events would occur. I was never by myself. It was always with a group of friends. And so we knew that I was not the only one this had happened to. And so it was a big event in our community. And once we came forward, we were family friends with the police chief there of the town. And so when I told my parents on a Wednesday night, I had the police chief in my house on a Sunday night, and he said, Jarrett, we're gonna get him. We're gonna go after him, and they did.
All right. Well, you talk about, of course, mountains in your new book, The Mountains Are Calling. You start with this famous quote from John Muir, which is one of my favorites. The mountains are calling and I must go. Why did you start with that?
Well, I was not familiar with John Muir until a person that was working on the project put me on to him. And you read that quote and he says, and I must go. And it's this idea of he's going to go to the mountains and he's going to discover what's there with the intent purposes of bringing back to the people people what he's discovered.
I never knew until your book the rest of that quote.
Yeah.
I thought that was the entire quote.
That's
the
right.
mountains are calling and I must go. But then he says, go discover and
That's
learn
right.
and bring back
That's
things.
right, to bring back what he's discovered. And so I thought, you know what, that's exactly what the mountains in Scripture teach us. God takes us to these epic events in Scripture that we know of. Abraham in Mount Moriah, Moses at Mount Sinai, Elijah at Carmel, Jesus, the Mount of Transfiguration. I could go on and on and on. But what is he doing? He wants to take us to these mountaintop moments in Scripture, teach us so that we can bring down what we've learned there to others.
And you relate some of what you went through in your brokenness to what the prophet Elijah went through and his brokenness.
Absolutely. It was amazing in studying his story. 1 Kings 17, we're all familiar with Elijah calling down fire from above. We love that story. Take me to the mountain to call down fire from God. But what we don't realize is that before Elijah ever gets to Mount Carmel, he's led by God to a place called Cherith and a place called Zarephath. Cherith in the Hebrew means to be cut down. Zarephath means to be melted or to smelt. And so it's just a process that we go through. You know, it's been said, God can't use someone greatly until he's been hurt deeply. And we want to get to the mountain sometimes to call down fire, but it's important to understand sometimes we have to go through Cherith and Zarephath, cutting down and smelting and melting.
Yeah, there's no fun. That's no fun. I love the mountaintops, but the valleys, you talk about the valleys that we have, you have to go through the valleys if you're going to get to the mountaintops, right?
Exactly. And we oftentimes think of valleys as low times in life. I mean, the audience that's watching us today, they probably think, the closest I've ever been to God is not on the mountaintop. It's been down in the valley. I've sensed his presence. We know Psalm 34, 17, 18, he's near to the brokenhearted, saves those who are contrite in spirit. And so one of the chapters I wasn't intending on writing, but became very beautiful to me just in studying it, was the Garden of Gethsemane. For this, we would say this was a valley moment for Jesus. Here he is being denied. He's about to be arrested, betrayed, left, abandoned by his disciples. And yet in that moment of crushing there in the Garden of Gethsemane, God sends his angels to be with him. But I just thought it was very picturesque that the Garden of Gethsemane, I've had the privilege of going to Israel a number of times, and the Garden of Gethsemane is located on the mountain of Olive, Mount Olivet. And so isn't it interesting that if you think about valleys as low times in life, yes, they are, but if we're talking about the mountaintop moments as being a sense where the presence of God is palatable and near, sometimes as we get out of those valleys and look back at them after time, we think, man, that's a mountaintop moment.
Okay, what's your favorite mountain to climb?
Oh man, that's a good question.
Like real mountain.
Real mountain to climb. Well, we go, we go to Red River.
You're in flatlands.
Yeah,
we
are
Texas.
very flatland. There are hills there, no mountains. But probably my family, we vacation in Colorado every year. We go to a place called Sky Ranch Family Camp, and there's a great mountain there that we climb. And
well,
so
you can't write a book with this title and not climb some high mountains.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, I'm not bragging, but I have been to the top of Kilimanjaro.
I can't even imagine.
Saying.
I've watched movies and documentaries about Kilimanjaro and Mount Everest. I don't think I could ever do it physically, but I have watched the documentaries.
If you can climb a 14er in Colorado, you can climb Kilimanjaro.
Oh my
Trust
goodness,
me.
I can't even imagine.
Well, great book. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Jarrett Stephens, for more on this, you can check out his new book. It's called The Mountains Are Calling, and it's available in stores nationwide.